Hello everyone. You won't believe how happy and excited I am with how this project is going, and how this amazing community has grown up around it, and best of all, the cool stories about how my little project is being used to get value and happiness out of all kinds of retro computers and synthesizers and breadboard projects. Initially, I thought it was only going to be a proof of concept for ultra nerds that left a lot of their hard software to be hacked together by the end user. But that's not what happened, and that's the beauty of a completely open source project. Thanks to collaboration and the feedback from the community and some amazing work on the software, mainly by Henrik Olsson, who wrote the Firestarter firmware, this is probably the right time to tell your friends there's a new ROM programmer in town that's super easy to use, super easy to modify, and has support for hundreds of ROMs and a thriving community ready to help support hundreds more. This is revision 2 of the Relatively Universal ROM Programmer, and it supports programming anything from a tiny EEPROM from the 70s that needs 25 volts to program it, up to a modern 8 megabit EEPROM or 5 volt flash-based ROM, and anything in between. Revision 2 is easier to use and ready to program most things you throw at it without fiddling with jumpers. Let's get back to that in a minute. This project is still sponsored by JLC PCB, and that's amazing because that's exactly where I would have ordered the PCBs from anyway. And best of all, their assembly service is so fast that I can order assembled boards and have them delivered in a week. I still don't order the through-hole components pre-soldered because it's a good way to keep the price of the board down, as most people who dabble in hobby electronics can handle soldering on a row of pin headers quite easily. If you're new to JLC PCB, they're a major manufacturing service provider trusted by millions of customers worldwide. Personally, I like them because they're super cheap, I've never had a quality issue with them, and if I make mistakes in my design, there's a good chance the JLC PCB engineers catch it before they go into production. If you'd like to have your own PCBs made and you're new to JLC PCB, you can use the link in the description to get a massive amount of new customer coupons that'll bring the cost of a stack of 6-layer PCBs down to just $5. The major difference between revision 1 and 2 is the lack of configuration jumpers. Before, you had to manually move jumpers around to set it for 24, 28 or 32 pin ROMs, and even if you're a super nerd, that's easy to forget or get the wrong way around. The reason for the jumpers was that what's a power pin on the smaller ROMs is an address line on the ROMs with more pins. Since most ROMs draw more current from the power pins than an address line coming from the register chips can handle, to be able to switch it in software, that had to be changed by hand by connecting the power pin to 5 volts directly. So how did we solve that? Well, over on the Hackerspace Clubhouse on Discord, I'm pretty sure it was Henrik Olsson, if it wasn't, he still gets the credit, that suggested using a transistor on an address line to drive those specific pins. Sadly, that wouldn't work, of course, since a single PNP transistor would invert the signal, breaking compatibility with the older boards. But if we use 2 transistors, just like we do to switch the programming voltages, that could actually work. And it does! With this little circuit, when we turn on address line 13, which is in the same place as the power pin on 24-pin ROMs, the NPN transistor lets current flow through the base of the PNP transistor, letting it conduct at least a few hundred milliamps to the pin without inverting the signal. And that works for both a power pin and an address line. Of course, there is a delay when using this to drive an address line, but the math says we're fine if we use a 4700 ohm resistor to pull the line quickly to ground when the PNP isn't conducting, making the delay just a few nanoseconds, which doesn't matter for the speeds we're expecting to program chips at. So, how much more expensive will throwing more circuitry at the problem be? Well, nothing. I've been selling these boards on my own store for $9 plus tax and shipping, and that's not going to change. That's not because I like losing money, but simply because the price of adding these components is so low. You see, when JLC PCB already has the pick-and-place machine feeders loaded with the same transistors for the programming voltage drivers, the added cost is about a single cent per transistor. And $9.04 just doesn't roll off the tongue the same way. So I couldn't be bothered to change the price. You can either get the board from my shop if you're in one of the 50 countries I ship to, or take advantage of the coupons from JLC PCB for the rest of the world. Oh, and before I forget, there's still one jumper left on the board, and it's only used for 28-pin ROMs with the programming voltage VPP on pin 1. What it does is connect the programming voltage from 32-pin ROMs to pin 1 of a 28-pin ROM, since they're not used at the same time. Just don't forget to remove it for 32-pin ROMs. In the extremely rare case, you have an 8 megabit EEPROM with A19 on pin 1, which still requires 12-volt programming voltage on pin 24 of the socket, you have to cut the trace in the middle of JP5 to completely disable higher voltages on pin 1. If you don't have 8 megabit EEPROMs with A19, then just don't worry about it. In software news, I'm happy to announce that Firestarter now supports at least a few flash-based ROMs with software write protection, which means you can also program chips like the SST39SF010, 20, and 40. And with all that, even though the TL8662 has support for other things than ROMs, and even if it is a little bit faster, I think it's a good time to say goodbye to the expensive programmer. At the very least, retire it in the back of the closet, because the Relatively Universal ROM Programmer does all the ROM programming I'll ever need, and if I break it or the socket on it, I can just fix it. And best of all, it's completely open for anyone to do whatever they want with it. Did I mention it has an SAO and an OLED port? Either way, thanks for watching.
Cause you're in what you think? What you think? Cause you're in what you think? What you think? Cause you're in I don't wanna let you go. I don't wanna let you go. Tell me what you want to know. Your fingers tell me so. Cause you're in my head. You are. Cause you're in my head. Cause you're in my